Congressman Adam Schiff of California is joining us. He's the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
First of all, on this whole issue of a potential conflict of interest, do you see a problem there? What is he supposed to do? He can't sell that entire business, right?
Well, I think it's an enormous problem, and I think he has to divest himself and his family of the business. There's no way that he can divorce himself of the knowledge he has of where the assets are located and how his decisions as president can affect his business interests. And the country will always wonder, as long as he has those business interests, is he doing this because he wants to continue doing business in Turkey? Is he doing it because he wants to grow his business in Russia? Is it because he has loans from China? Those are not questions we want the nation to be asking. He has a country to run. It's a big enough job without the conflict presented by his businesses.
Well, when you say divest his business, what does that mean?
Well, that means I think he does need to sell off the businesses.
Sell the entire Trump organization?
I think that he needs to make sure that his family, including his children, are not owning that business, running that business, and presenting him with a supreme conflict of interest. I think it may raise a constitutional question on the Emoluments Clause, but more than that, it raises a tremendous appearance of impropriety, if not risk of actual impropriety.
You see a problem with some of these foreign embassies here in Washington, Bahrain, Azerbaijan, hosting events at the new Trump Hotel down the street from the White House?
Absolutely. And remember, this is a president-elect who, even 10 days before the election, was pumping his hotels, doing events at his hotels, marketing his hotels right in the midst of a presidential campaign. If he's going to do that during the campaign, why on earth would we think he's going to stop promoting the businesses after the campaign?
But people knew all that about Donald Trump. They knew he had a huge business in real estate and casinos and country clubs. But he was elected president of the United States. They knew all about him.
They knew that he had these business interests. They may have hoped that if he became president that he would deal with the conflicts of interest as other presidents have. We've seen a lot of those hopes prove illusory on other issues. And I hope this one is not another disappointment.
We'll see specifically the legal impact of what he decides to do. He's going to have a news conference December 15th spelling out what he and his lawyers have come up with. We'll, of course, have extensive coverage of that. Let's move on to some other news that we're following right now. Scott Pruitt, the Oklahoma Attorney General, climate change denier. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is this is the kind of appointment you make when you not only want to radically change policy, but you want to poke people in the eye while you do it. This was, I think, a terrible choice to put a climate denier in this position. It basically tells not only the country, but the rest of the world, we are giving up our leadership on this issue. We're giving up our leadership. We're diminishing our standing in the world when it comes to advocating for the planet and combating climate change. It's another peg down, I think, in our global standing, and it worries me terribly. This person could end up presiding over the dismantlement of one of our key agencies and a protector of the environment.
Well, during the campaign, Donald Trump made no secret about his disdain for the Environmental Protection Agency, which he is going to be heading if he's confirmed by the Senate. And the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. Realistically, do you see any possibility he might not be confirmed?
Well, he's about as toxic a nominee as you can get. I think that given they have the votes, it depends on which battles Democrats in the Senate choose to fight. I think they will fight this one. I think they'll fight the Attorney General. Whether they'll succeed or not may depend on how much public opinion can be moved. But they've got to try, regardless of the outcome.
What do you think about Andrew Puzder, who's going to be nominated by the president-elect to become the labor secretary? He's someone who's on the record saying he opposes an increase, for example, in the minimum wage.
Well, yet another appointment that would be more apropos if it were the anti-labor department or the anti-environmental protection agency. These are folks who are, I think, very disparaging of the responsibilities that they're going to take on. This is someone who doesn't represent workers at all, who's against the minimum wage, who's against overtime rules that would reward those who are working longer hours. So I think another sop to the base, the hardcore base of the GOP, does nothing to bridge the divide that the president-elect talked about in the context of the Time magazine story. These are steps that will only aggravate the divide between Americans.
Well, Puzder may be opposed to increasing the minimum wage, but during the campaign when I interviewed Donald Trump, he said he was open to raising the minimum wage to about $10 an hour. Presumably, the president of the United States can tell the labor secretary, he's confirmed by the Senate, to go ahead and support an increase in the minimum wage, right?
Presumably. And we'll see how far.
Why do you say presumably?
Well, I don't think anyone knows who's really going to be running this government, how much he's going to delegate decisions like this. This president-elect, I think, is someone who is content in many respects to say, I don't want to be bothered with the small decisions. I want to be the chief decider. Whether he will actively engage himself on minimum wage issues, whether he'll use the muscle necessary as president to work with a Congress where many in the GOP don't want to increase the minimum wage. I have to say appointments like this don't give me much confidence that he will fight to fulfill those promises.
Well, do you think the Vice President, Mike Pence, will effectively be running the government and he'll sort of stay above all of that? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I don't know that the Vice President will. I think, as we saw in the campaign, the President-elect bridled whenever it was suggested that Mike Pence ought to be at the top of the ticket or that he was going to do or say anything that contradicted the President. In fact, you remember quite well when the President-elect slapped down the Vice President for disagreeing with him over Syria. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I can see the President-elect delegating tremendous discretion to agency heads and simply not being interested in the day-to-day working of the government. He's not taking regular intelligence briefings. He's spending more time at celebratory rallies than he is preparing himself for the job.
So you don't like these two potential nominees for EPA, for Labor Secretary, but you do like some of the others. Who do you like?
I do. Well, I like General Mattis a great deal. I think he's just he's
going to be nominated for Defense Secretary.
I think he's a superb choice.
And you'll vote and you think there should be a waiver allowing him to be.
You know, I think he should be judged on the merits, and I've been strongly inclined to support a waiver. I have to say, though, I'm getting a lot of heartburn, Wolf, over the fact that he is populating other positions, key positions in the cabinet with other generals. That raises further question about whether there's really going to be civilian leadership. And that does concern me. One of the yet-to-be-filled positions of Secretary of State, if he puts another general there, that is only going to magnify those concerns. But I like what Mattis has to say about torture. He's against it. I like what he has to say about Russia. He'll talk some sense, I hope, into the president-elect that Putin is not our friend. I like his strong support of NATO. I like his strong pushback against Iran's conventional malevolence. There's a lot to like about Mattis. There's a lot to like about General Kelly, another good choice, although we don't know that much.
For Homeland Security Secretary.
For Homeland Security. We don't know that much about his views on immigration, so the senators need to do some thorough vetting. But these are solid people, and with General Kelly, you have someone who knows in the most painful and intimate of terms what it's like to commit our service members to battle and to lose a family member.
Yeah, he's a Gold Star father. His son, Second Lieutenant Robert Kelly, was killed in action in Afghanistan, and General Kelly has spoken about that very movingly indeed. We have more to discuss, Congressman. I'm going to take a quick break. We'll resume our conversation right after this. Congressman Adam Schiff of California, the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. You've also written a letter on this very sensitive issue to the president requesting a classified briefing to provide details, specifically details on Russian hacking of various American political organizations. Has that request from you to the president, has that request been granted?
It hasn't been granted yet, and I think that all the members of the House ought to receive the same briefing those of us on the Intelligence Committee have about Russian meddling in our election. This is something I think, frankly, the president ought to speak to the country about and share as much as he can in declassified form with the country. These events, these attacks by Russia, cyber attacks, were really unprecedented in their scale and their impact, and we haven't seen the last of them. And one of my concerns is there hasn't been an adequate deterrent. There really hasn't been any cost the Russians have paid. And that has got to change. It may have been to the benefit, I think it certainly was, of Donald Trump during the campaign. But the minute he crosses Putin, as inevitably he will have to, because Putin is not our friend, he may be the subject of damaging dumping of documents. And he may find that he has a different view of it when he's on the receiving end of that kind of punishment.
Because the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, they wrote a letter, a public statement in early October saying this went to the highest levels of the Russian government, the hacking of the Democratic National Committee, the release of these emails that from John Podesta, who was the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign. When they say the highest levels of the Republic of the Russian Republic, does that mean Putin himself ordered this, knew about it, was involved in it?
You know, unfortunately, Wolf, I can't go beyond what the director has agreed to declassify, but I think you can tell Putin has a very small circle around him. He runs that Kremlin. There's not a lot of dissent. and something of this significance, getting involved in the hacking of a U.S. election, leaving fingerprints all over your work, that's not something I think that can take place, as the director said, without agreement at the highest levels. I also want to say, in terms of the Senate letter that you and Jim referred to about Ukraine, I fully agree with the contents of that letter. I think we should provide stronger support to Ukraine. Frankly, a year or 2 years ago, I was advocating that we ought to provide stronger defensive weapons to Ukraine. And these things are not unrelated. When you don't deter the Russians, when you don't push back hard, they view it as an open door, whether that's in Ukraine or that's in the cyber world. We have to meet this newly aggressive, belligerent Russia with a strong pushback.
Let us know if you get that request granted from the President of the United States. We'll be anxious to hear.
Thank you.
Adam Schiff is the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Coming up.